Good morning, everybody. We will get started in just a few minutes. Just want to give folks the heads up that we are live streaming this morning on YouTube. So as you join, you'll see a little reminder pop up that that we do indeed do that. Also, if you haven't pulled up materials that were sent yesterday, my colleague Nadia Perez-Reyes sent a few docs that we're largely going to be driving through during today's meeting. So again, stand by. We'll get going in just a few short minutes. Thanks. Welcome, folks. I'm going to do my best T.R. Williams impersonation here. Anybody who was on one of the governor's listening sessions knows that about 10 minutes before an event started, T.R. Williams, who was working at the governor's office, would say, "Hello, hello, hello, welcome, welcome, welcome," and give all of her updates. And she would do it about 10 or 15 times in the course of 15 minutes before a meeting started. So that everybody had what they needed before the meeting. And I'm always an early bird, so I got to hear TR do that a whole bunch of times. So I'll just give folks a few items very quickly here. Again, we will start in just a few minutes. We are live streaming on YouTube this morning. Really your preference on camera off, camera on for today's meeting. Today's meeting is going to be largely predicated on a few documents that were sent out yesterday by my colleague Nadia Perez-Reyes, and we'll be largely sort of driving through those documents, sharing some information, and then looking for any sort of feedback or first ideas that spring from there. If you are here just as a listener on behalf of your agency, that's great. We're glad you're here. You can feel free to just keep your camera off. If you are here specifically as a designee for your agency, so a designee for your principal or your secretary, as we get to that discussion section, please feel free to chime in, to speak on behalf of your principal or your secretary. So just trying to distinguish folks who are here as listeners from folks who are here as sort of participating members of the council. Let's see. This should be a relatively brief meeting. We did have to do a last minute switch up. Gotta love those summer illnesses that are hitting all of us as we are regaining our ability to be social and be out in the world. And so really want to thank my colleagues, Caitlin Barrick and Andrea Camilleri for jumping in. A large portion of our agenda today was going to be driven by our Division Administrator for Early Care and Education, Erin Arango Escalante, but she is under the weather this morning. So luckily, we've got a lot of really awesome people who know this material. So I will go ahead and get us going this morning. I see our list creeping up, and welcome all the people that are joining us this morning. I think most of you know me, but my name is Emily Amundsen. I am privileged to serve as the Secretary at the Department of Children and Families, and Leadership Council on Early Years is one of my favorite meetings to plan for and to host, because it's really that idea of bringing us all together around state agencies to think about kids, and their families, to think about folks in that 0 to 5 space, and to think about how we can all swim further, faster when we work together. So that's what we're here to do today. Want to welcome you, and I guess call this meeting to order. We always take attendance off of our participant list, so we won't run through who's on the call. But once we get to that discussion section, or if there are questions during the meeting, it would be helpful if you just give your name and then which agency you're representing. And again, if you're here as a listener, great, we're glad to have you. Just know that you're welcome here to listen to the meeting on behalf of your agency. I did send out draft meeting minutes from our April 21st meeting, and I do need somebody from the council to provide a motion around approval of those minutes. Can I get a motion?
This is Rebecca from the Prevention Board. I'll motion for approval of the minutes as is.
Thank you, Rebecca. Can I get a second?
This is Linda Hall from the Office of Children's Mental Health. I'll second.
Thank you, Linda. Great. And I'm going to just ask folks to come on camera, raise their hands. All approved. All right. Any opposed? Okay, hearing none, we'll approve those minutes. Thank you very much. Next, just I guess a reflection from me, and would welcome any other reflections from others on the recent budget. We're of course excited that that we do have a signed budget. I think that coming into budget season, we were absolutely ecstatic about the status of things around the governor's budget proposals in childcare and in early education more broadly. And to be really honest, I think that we're coming out of budget season a little deflated for not making more headway in this budget. And you know, that's just how it goes. And so you know, if you would have talked to me a few weeks ago, I think that maybe I would have not been quite as chipper as I am today. But when you've been in state government a while, you know that the work just goes on. And so we're back in a place again of thinking about how do we make those next steps? How do we start to problem solve through some of the things that maybe didn't make it through the budget process, and how do we build it bigger and stronger, and build that coalition even larger for next time. So when you've been in state government a while, you know that the budget planning process is never actually really done. It starts almost the day after the governor signs the process or signs the budget, and so we're anxious to get right back to the table and to start you know, the process for 2 years from now. That said, we did receive an increase in the Wisconsin Share Subsidy Program rates, which will take us to the 65th percentile, which is good news for kids and families. It's not exactly what we were hoping for, but there is an increase there. And we did receive additional funding for the Milwaukee Early Care Administration staffing and system change process. Milwaukee Early Care Administration processes over 50% of our Wisconsin Shares subsidy program cases. And so it's really important to keep this piece of our system robust and working and highly effective, and they certainly are. So a few bright spots there. Any other pieces that folks would want to highlight in this section? I just want to give space if folks feel like there was a particular budget bright spot in those early years that folks want to give voice to.
This is, excuse me, this is Linda Hall from the Office of Children's Mental Health. I share your disappointment over the budget generally, but we had 7 items that we were tracking and saw that we got something on 4 of the 7. With a highlight being that the full amount that was requested for school mental health collaboration grants was passed. So that's now a $10 million annual fund that we really think is making a difference for kids of all ages, but also young kids.
Thank you, Linda. That's exactly what I was hoping for, is some of that dot connecting around other pieces of the budget that we think will make an impact. And absolutely those that work around school mental health has an effect across the entire system. Thanks. Anybody else want to jump in on budget? Okay. So just to do a bit of recap and a bit of introduction for folks that may be participating today on behalf of their agency for the first time. Again, our Leadership on Early Counsel meetings have highlighted a number of different things. We always do a different topic each time we meet. But what we keep coming back to is this idea that child care is infrastructure. And this seems to be a theme that's really gaining a lot of speed. It's gaining a lot of interest and traction in larger communities. And so today's topic is workforce, and particularly how childcare is more recognized than ever now as an essential and critical infrastructure piece supporting the economy. And to that end, we are really interested in shifting this LECE group, and you'll see this shift today, from the sort of information sharing phase to the action-oriented phase. And we're trying to center LECE and your voices in some of the center of the collaboration that we're doing to solve through these workforce ideas, these workforce options, these workforce innovations that I think are at our fingertips. And they're at our fingertips because state agencies are really plugged into childcare workforce issues. They're at our fingertips because of federal funds that are coming in the form of relief to our state. And so today, we want to use the LECE meeting as an opportunity to kind of share a little bit of some semi-formed thinking on this issue. And we want to recognize right off the bat that the work that DCF is doing is only a part of the story. And we've tried to create the space in some of the documents that we're going to be sharing with you today to recognize some of the great work that some of your agencies are doing to connect childcare, workforce, infrastructure, rural and urban communities. And so just to highlight, obviously the announcement from last week from WEDC and DWD the funding that they're providing in the form of workforce investment is such a perfect example of the broader landscape on supporting, workforce in general, but that support has an absolute impact on what we're talking about here, on childcare and around the workforce that both uses childcare and also is employed in childcare centers. So the reason we'd like to share some of this thinking with you today, and again, try to use it as an opportunity for some feedback, for some early thinking around that, is because we know these decisions have an impact on your agencies. It could be both from the vantage point that childcare absolutely has an impact on your employees' ability to come to work, to return to the physical workspace. Or it could be that you spend a lot of time thinking about the state's workforce, the state's economy, and how childcare plays a critical role in that piece of the puzzle. So again, we want to lift up LISI as a hub to connect all of that work, the different stakeholders, the ideas, the projects. We've been able to really use this hub, this opportunity to come together to learn about things that are going on in your agencies and collaborate early and often. And so again, just lifting up some of the work that we've been doing cross-agency to get in early and make it really clear that childcare is a part of a workforce development initiative. These kinds of things wouldn't happen if we didn't have this time together. So I'm really grateful again for the time that you all spend here. I think this meeting will be a relatively sort of brief drive through of a couple of these big ideas. Certainly welcome any discussion as a result of what Caitlin and Andrea are going to share with us today. And then we will send you all on your way to celebrate all day Bucks and Six, go Bucks. And we'll have a wonderful day celebrating all things Wisconsin, Milwaukee, and basketball. So that's what I'm betting is going to happen today. We'll see if I'm right. With that, I will kick it over to Caitlin and Andrea to kind of drive us through our content for today.
Great, thank you. I'm Caitlin Farrick, and this is my first meeting. I don't think I've met many of you. I am the new Grants Initiatives Advisor at DECE, and I provide, in part, programmatic oversight and direction for our preschool development grant. And I know you all know Andrea, but do you want to introduce yourself, Andrea, in case we have new people?
Sure. This is Andrea Camilleri, and I am a Strategic Initiatives Advisor at DCF, working on the preschool development grant primarily, and developing and implementing our strategic plan going forward. So I look forward to chatting with you this morning. I'm actually calling in from a cabin on a lake up near Minocqua, Wisconsin. So if at any point my audio gets a little scrambled, I encourage you all to please interrupt me, and I'll invite my colleagues to take over if that's the case. Hopefully it's coming through loud and clear.
Yeah, you sound good right now, so we'll keep our fingers crossed. So,
okay.
So Andrea, I moved it over. You're to do the slides, so I moved it over to the big workforce and little workforce slide.
Okay, so slide. All right. So you should be looking at the 4 interlocking circles of kind of a Venn diagram image. Unfortunately, I can't get on Zoom to see that with you, but I want to just kind of offer up a reminder. We've talked with you about our strategic framework several times, which you see here on the screen. And we've also discussed these issues of childcare as infrastructure, and childcare serving as really the workers of childcare are the workforce behind the workforce. So there's lots of catchy phrases we can throw out there. We have started internally to use capital W workforce to refer to our general workforce across Wisconsin, all the wonderful people, including parents and family members who make our economy run and are also responsible for raising and caring for their children and sometimes grandchildren and others in their community. And then we have the lowercase w workforce, which is referring to our early care and education teachers, directors, and other supporting staff who are absolutely essential. We learned that during this pandemic more so than ever, to allowing the rest of our communities to stay at work and keep our economy running. So again, this graphic you see here on the screen represents our strategic framework, workforce being the largest of the four circles, because essentially if we don't have a strong early care and education workforce, then our issues of access, affordability, and equality really go out the window. They aren't as relevant. We've got to have that workforce in place so that we can keep our programs strong and running and continue to pursue our overall vision of equity and inclusion in the state for families' engagement in our society. So with that, let's go to the next slide, please.
Okay, I did.
Thank you. So in consideration of these major factors at play in supporting our workforce in early care and education across the state and our overall economy, we put together a theory of action that includes 3 major strategies. And these are also very closely tied to the strategic plan that was developed through our preschool development grant in 2020. So our goals here on the screen are that Wisconsin will increase compensation for our childcare workforce so that staff will enter and remain in this field of early care and education. That has been a major challenge, and so we really need to find alternative ways. Essentially, the business model for childcare is broken, as we have discussed over many of our different meetings in the past year and beyond. So we need to come up with some new strategies to increase that compensation and retain our quality staff. In so doing, we will be able to increase access to high quality, affordable care for all the children in our state and families, and therefore allow parents and guardians to enter and remain in the workforce, and ultimately support employers to recruit and retain high quality staff in a competitive labor market. So really supporting that capital W workforce all across the state. Let's go ahead and move to the next slide.
Okay.
And so the 3 strategies we've put forth for you that we shared previously at a June 21st meeting, when many of you came together in an ad hoc volunteer meeting of cross-agency members to just brainstorm, we put forth these 3 different strategies, and it seemed like there was a very positive reception to these ideas of focusing on 3 major strategies around pipeline, shared services, and public-private partnerships. And you see those recapped on page 2 of the handout we sent in advance. So really, our pipeline strategies are a series of strategies that allow us to promote early care and education careers. And that's through increasing higher education access and people signing up and enrolling and completing courses, as well as other pathways, such as apprenticeships and other models to train even high school students, for example, to take courses in college or in high school that give them the credits they need right out of high school to be able to enter into the early care and education field. So a couple different ways that we know of that we are already investing in these areas include DCFs, payments through grant funding and other funding towards TEACH scholarships, which are administered by the Wisconsin Early Childhood Association, or WECA. We also know that DPI has been doing a lot with dual credit coursework, like I said, encouraging high school students to enter an ECE career after graduation. And we're aware of the Department of Workforce Development piloting early care and education apprenticeships and looking to expand in that area. So there are some things happening. I'll say more about that on the next slide. And we hope we can grow this even more. Also, then strategy number 2 within shared services includes our opportunity to expand statewide networks that allow providers to really build economies of scale. They can pool their staff, their resources and services, and receive support through these networks for their business operations. We know that early care and education providers often are drawn to the field for many different reasons, but primarily for the love of children and their ability to nurture and care for and keep children safe. And sometimes those business skills that they then have to learn to operate a full business can be a challenge. Many of them are rising to that challenge, obviously, but they appreciate the support that comes through something like a shared service network and the opportunity to join in professional development with their peers and colleagues around the state. So again, we have some investments in this area and are looking to grow those right now, primarily through DCF and WICA. We have a large investment in the Wisconsin Early Care and Education Shared Services Network, hoping to expand that through the vast majority of our state. And then finally, where we'll spend the most time talking today is in our realm of public-private partnerships. So through this strategy, we are seeking to develop innovative community-based childcare business models, again, that fix that broken model and allow childcare to be sustained, to have reliable revenue coming through that isn't reliant only on parent and family tuition, because that simply is not enough to operate a really high-quality program in this day and age in Wisconsin and really throughout the nation. So let's go to the next slide, and I'll just show you in a little more detail what we have going in each of these different 3 strategies. Again, this is a recap of our June 21st meeting, but for those who are not there, you saw this slide previously on that date. Within the pipeline and shared services area, we have multiple investments and programs occurring. I alluded to a couple of them. So like I said previously, we're trying to reach about 75% of childcare programs through our shared services network expansion in the next year. So that's really exciting. We have a lot of federal stimulus money going toward the childcare workforce pipeline. And then we have also identified some initial investments and programs through some apprenticeship work in Milwaukee, dual enrollment programs. And then with shared services, we're continuing to evaluate the effectiveness of our efforts so far as we look to expand. And in public-private partnerships, we see great opportunity. We have federal stimulus funding, we have preschool development grant funding, we have a lot of interest statewide and partnerships stepping forward to develop business toolkits, to perhaps subsidize childcare slots and do some new startups of childcare in areas where there are deserts and we lack those. So we have opportunities to consider supporting startup and construction costs for public-private partnerships. But then in the bottom row, we also have ideas, things that are just bubbling up that we hear from others about that we have not begun to pursue, and that's our opportunity today to really try to solidify some of the things in that middle row and then brainstorm a little further on the bottom row about some of these opportunities to come together, grow apprenticeships, sustainability of networks, but especially under that public-private partnerships column. That will be our focus today, thinking about how maybe some of you may be aware of strategies we could use to offer tax credits or housing and business loans for family providers, employer-sponsored programs, and more. So hopefully the handout we sent in advance kind of got your juices flowing and ideas for how we can collaborate. And with that, I will turn it over to my colleague, Caitlin, to really explain to you our proposal around public-private partnerships, and then we'll have ample time to discuss sort of your ideas for how you can support it.
Caitlin,
Thank you.
Caitlin, before you jump in, thanks, Andrea, so much. Before you jump in, can we just go back to that slide, the sort of grid slide right before the ideas? And I just want to ask if anybody has any questions for Andrea on
Sure.
just this idea of, 3 strategies. We've got pipeline, we've got shared services, we've got public-private partnerships, and really the goal of this chart is to sort of show, there are places where we feel like the DCF funding that we receive either through federal or state or state channels allows us to have multiple investments, multiple programs. We're, cooking with grease. Everything's sort of perfectly aligned to be able to deliver on those strategies. The middle column, I would say that is the place when I look across DCF funding streams. These are all places where we've got some initial investments, or maybe we're still in sort of the pulling together of the specs on how we would start a new kind of program. Or it's a place where we're partnering with another agency or several agencies who might be better poised to do some of this. And so looking over, and we'll talk a little bit more about this in a second, but like the business toolkits is a super great example of a place where, there have been a lot of different agencies who have either pitched this idea or have had this idea pitched to them. And so the ability to use this group to sort of get everybody together, swimming in the same direction on the same page, it's been a really good use of the capacity of this group to make sure that at the end of this, we have, the right kind of business toolkit on the right cadence with the right players involved. And then finally, that bottom column is, I would say, the place where, from a DCF perspective, we're really flagging. We have either issues with funding that potentially preclude us from taking a lead role, or we have issues with content expertise that would preclude us from taking a lead role. So those are places where we're really flagging, like, okay, we hear these ideas, but we don't necessarily have the juice either from a fiscal perspective or from a content knowledge perspective to get off the ground without some additional help. So I just kind of want to peel back the curtain on this chart for a second. Any questions or comments for Andrea on just sort of this idea of kind of our theory of action? Okay, great. So Caitlin, why don't you transition to the other doc?
Yes, and I'm going to pull this up, but as Emily mentioned, you should have received this in your email. Let me just start a new screen share. So this draft document provides an overview, and can everyone see it? I guess I should ask before I keep going. Okay, great. You never know. This provides a draft overview of, and we're going to rename this to something a little more snappy, but our collaborative workforce support initiative, which is composed for now, and again, we want to hear what you are all doing, but from the DCF, DECE standpoint of two main programs, as well as two supports, if you will, which include public-private partnership grant opportunities, workforce initiative grants through the preschool development grant, a business toolkit that Emily alluded to, as well as technical assistance to support all of these efforts. And so I'm first going to provide an overview of what we are working on as far as these public-private partnership funding opportunities, the toolkit, and the technical assistance opportunity. And then we are going to talk about other things that are going on and ways that you as LACY members and your agencies and programs might be involved in some of these efforts, as well as we know there are things that you are all working on that might be relevant to this work. So we'd love to hear from you because, again, as Emily discussed and as Andrea mentioned, we know that there's a lot of expertise that you all provide that's not necessarily held in DCF and funding and opportunities that we may not be aware of, and work that you're doing that we may not be aware of that will really help bolster these efforts around strengthening the childcare workforce. So up here is just another overview of the pipeline shared services and public partnership strategies that Andrea just went over. But as we move forward to these new opportunities, public-private partnership funding program and the workforce grants. So we're hoping for both. Before I dive into these, as far as timeline, we're hoping for these two programs to launch this fall with applications coming out, and we'll talk a little bit more about the parameters of those in October, making awards before the end of the year so that this work can really start January 1st, right in the new year. So that's just providing you with a little timeline before I talk a little bit about exactly the parameters of these programs. So the public-private partnership funding is $10 million from the Corona Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act, or CRSA. And this is really focused on supporting our existing child care providers. So this is more money than the workforce grants, which we'll talk about in a minute. But the nuance for this funding is that it must go directly to child care providers. It is focused, this particular program, as the name suggests, on building these partnerships. And certainly businesses are a key partner in this work, but the funding must go to child care providers. So really focused on supporting those who are already in the field, and businesses can contract with their established child care providers in their community for the purchasing or contracting of slots for children of their employees, apprentices, students, or interns. So we've talked a little bit about how higher education could be a business partner too, and working to help provide care for the students who may have children that are enrolled in their institutions. And I should add that we have the high level vision, as Emily said, for all of these programs, but we're right now working on the criteria for all of them. So some of the details we're working on, and again, would welcome your feedback. One other thing, which we're going to talk about more in depth when we overview our ask, is that both the public-private partnership funding and the workforce grants do not support capital improvements. So no structural improvements, no construction, no purchasing of facilities, which we know are a huge gap in a lot of communities around expanding childcare access. So that is an area, as we're reviewing these programs and how LACI members might be supportive, that we are looking for perhaps some opportunities to provide those supports to the childcare community.
Caitlin,
yep.
And can I just clarify, the reason that there are no capital costs in either of those two programs allowed is because of federal requirements?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So it's just not an allowable use of those funding streams.
Yep.
And then before you talk about workforce, can I just pause for questions?
Yes.
I don't want to step on your if you had other things to share on public-private partnership, but I want to make sure if people have questions. So Caitlin sort of alluded to the idea that we have to sort of develop criteria, and I think that some of the questions that you might have hearing about this funding program for the first time might be helpful in helping us tease out what kinds of criteria we need to either explicitly lay out or sort of make clear. So one example that I have would be I think we've been hearing a lot about centers that have needed to close a room because they're not able to find available workforce, right? Like workforce has been an issue in this sector as it is in other sectors. Would the public-private partnership funding program be the kind of program that a center could use potentially with a business partner to be able to reopen a room by potentially driving up the rate of pay for an early child care worker in a center, that kind of thing?
I think that sounds like something that would be allowable and that we would want. Again, the funding would go to the child care provider to help, support that increased compensation, if you will. And then the businesses could contract to hold those spots for their workforce. As long as the funding, again, was going to the child care providers. I think that would be, I don't know if Andrew, if you have any reflections on that too, but I think that would be something that because we really do want these dollars to encourage higher staff compensation, help cover their expenses. And I think part of the reason that this public-private partnership funding opportunity is exciting is it really encourages businesses to partner with the providers that are already in their community. So certainly, if there has been a childcare center that's had to close a classroom because of COVID and because of staffing and other sorts of issues, I think that would be that would be a use of the funding that I would, that we would definitely consider, because we have heard that there are those providers with, vacancies, and, who've had to close. And sometimes the businesses aren't necessarily aware. And I think at times the first thought is to let me open something new. And this is really encouraging rather than starting something new, which is also in some cases very appropriate for them to reach out to the partners that are already doing great work around early childhood in their communities. And I see we have a raised hand and I can't see your name.
Kathy. Go ahead, Kathy.
Hi, Kathy Blumenfeld here. I was just curious on the matching funds that are required for this program. Are those funds also going directly to wages, or could those matching funds be used for other, structural improvements or changes in the child care center? I'm assuming those matching funds come from the business.
Yeah, I think it could come, again, as long as they're not federal funds, I think they could come from, we still have to establish this criteria, but typically on other federal grants I've worked on around these sorts of partnerships, it could come from an array of sources. So as long as it wasn't federal funding, a lot of times in kind would also be acceptable as well, to your point. So perhaps if there was a facility that a business had that they could allow the providers to utilize, and that could be considered, matching funds via in kind. I don't want to say that for 100% sure, as we haven't established that, but I know in other similar, I worked a lot on the early Head Start childcare partnership grants, and in those grants, which are very similar to this sort of setup, that was something that was allowable, or funds from, community development or chambers of commerce, those sorts of sources as well, as long as they're non-federal.
Yeah, no, I really like how the state funding is going to improve wages, which is awesome. But sometimes to get that business interest, they might want to use other funds to do enhancements to the center or changes that are not just directly tied to wages. So that's helpful. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, and I would add that, again, some of those structural things you're talking about really also improve the quality of the workplace for staff, which also helps retain staff. If you have a place of work that, is safe and welcoming and, high quality, that's important as well as for the children.
Thanks. Any other questions on sort of public-private partnership funding, sort of prospecting? Is this the kind of program that could do X? Any questions like that? I think I have one more, Caitlin, before we move on. Is this the kind of program that would allow sort of a trusted or reputable center in a community to expand to potentially a satellite location, potentially, housed in, and I'm just making this up, housed in, like co-located with an employer in the area? Again, as long as the funding wasn't used for capital, it was used for, for other pieces of that puzzle. But is that the type of kind of case that might work for a program like this?
Andrew, what do you think? Because I think it would be allowable, but then, as we established the criteria, I think we have to establish the nuance between that and the workforce grants too, because then in the workforce grants, the way we've sort of constructed them in our heads is to enhance existing programs through expansion or new offerings. So I think that one of the things we have to do through our criteria, and I think part of this discussion is if that's something that we view as a big need, then we should, prioritize that in the criteria. If we do think that the expansion of existing providers is something that's important, that's something we need to look at in our criteria, as opposed to, are we going to prioritize the scenario that you mentioned before, Emily, where they already have these classrooms, they're just perhaps vacant. I think that's something that we have to define within the criteria, and also probably do a good job describing what will support in this opportunity versus the workforce grants. I think we have to be very clear and explicit in our criteria. Is that fair, Andrea, or am I wrong?
Yeah. No, I think you're correct. And as I was listening to the scenario before the secretary, my initial reaction is that that type of expansion would be a better fit for the workforce grant, because it is moving into new innovation and expansion. And our primary interest in the first funding program is really to shore up existing childcare and make sure that they have their existing slots filled, they have the funding to adequately compensate their employees and keep everything going as well as it possibly can for those existing centers. And then if we want to innovate and grow, that's really, I'll let Caitlin say a lot more about the workforce grants.
Yeah, so
again, there's our opportunity to tease this out and figure it out together.
Yes.
So thank you.
Certainly. And these questions are really good because they get us to think. And as you're asking again, I think being really explicit about both, we just have to make sure that we are very clear between the two, because there definitely are some similarities to make sure people are applying for the right thing, and we set the people up for success in their applications. So for the workforce grants, that's really focused on innovation, like Andrea mentioned. So this is intended to create something new. So in some of our childcare deserts, we know there are many of them across the state where there really is just no childcare or no quality childcare available. So this funding could be available to start a new childcare business for those who might be interested in entering the field. But also this funding could be used to enhance existing programs through expansion, new offerings, new locations. And the partnerships are really, again, focused on supporting higher staff compensation and reducing expenses. So this funding comes from our preschool development grant. We have about 6.5 million budgeted for this opportunity. However, we do have some flexibility to add more funding if this is something where we're receiving a lot of interest and really quality applications. The funding can go to community organizations or to businesses. So again, it does not have to go to the childcare providers in this case. So if there was a local business, or community development organization or some other entity that was interested in applying for this would be the opportunity they would apply for. Again, though, we cannot use this funding for capital expenditures. As Emily mentioned, these are federal restraints that we have to abide by. So again, although we know it's a big need, this is something that we're hoping perhaps that these partnerships between childcare and business can foster, supporting some of these capital expenses. And I just want to pause. We have a question about, is the $10 million funding for the public-private partnerships listed the initial or total available funding? So right now it's the total available funding, I believe. I will verify that, but I believe that is the case.
That is the case at this point, Caitlin. But I do think, to your question, Tatiana, I think that the American Rescue Plan Act funding is another potentially viable stream that would allow us to take, if we built a successful program that we maxed out, quickly and we found to be very effective, that could be another potential fertile funding stream to continue a successful program. That said, I'm definitely not poring over the allowables and disallowables, but I have the sense that could be a potential next step for us.
Great. So there are some nuances between the two programs. Workforce grants have a wider audience that we could potentially reach as far as applicants for businesses and community organizations. Again, with the hope that they would be partnering with childcare partners in this application, which is something that we would put forth in the criteria, making sure that there is that collaboration between the childcare community and the business and community, business and community organization community, if you will, in these funding opportunities. So I'm going to pause and see if there's any questions about these workforce grants specifically. Kathy?
Just a question on the childcare deserts. So if one of the goals is to really create childcare opportunities in those deserts, when you score the grants or give out the grants, will you give a higher priority to those that are in those desert locations?
That's certainly something that's been discussed. And Emily, I saw you were going to talk.
No, I want to say, Kathy, that's exactly the right question to ask, you know, and I guess I'm interested, you know, I mean, I think last look, 75% of our rural areas are classified as childcare deserts, as well as some of our most populous urban areas. And so, you know, that's an interesting, I would say, criteria decision, and it wouldn't be particularly exclusive to make a decision like that, but it would certainly center the funding in places that have, you know, have that like clinical designation as childcare desert. So, so I just think it's the right question to be asking right now, and definitely something that we're crunching on.
And even building awareness of them. I mean, some areas might not realize how desperate their locations are as they try and think through why am I not getting workforce. Really just the education and awareness around those desert locations, I think would be important.
You're very right. I think a lot of people don't know until they themselves perhaps have to seek care for their children. And then it's surprising to them, even though in our field, you know, we talk about it all the time. But to your point, building that awareness, I think is still a really critical missing component because people really don't realize until it impacts them as they're, you know, trying to enroll their child in care.
Thank you.
One question that I will ask, and then if folks have other questions, but it's another sort of case study that as I talk with folks in communities, it's an idea that comes up a lot, which is sort of like a community organization wants to run some kind of a revolving loan fund for early childhood centers to focus on, so in this particular example that I'm thinking of, it's really focused on taking providers that have a lower quality rating star and helping them increase their quality rating so that they have access to more state funding, you know, and that really grows their quality rating, particularly in places that you know, have less quality rating in their area. Is that the kind of funding that could potentially be used for something like that?
I think that's something we could definitely consider. And I would add that, so have to say I'm new to Wisconsin, and so I'm still learning some things, but I know from some conversations that I've had since I started a few weeks ago only, and also it was the case in Michigan, which is where I come from, that one of the reasons that some providers have challenges, one of the main reasons they have challenges in increasing their quality rating is around the workforce piece. So their inability to attract and retain staff with the credentials and degrees that allow them to get more points, if you will, within the quality rating and improvement system, which then keeps them, you know, kind of stagnated within that system. And so I think we could talk about whether or not, one, we wanted to prioritize these partnerships that are attending to helping people raise their quality, but also part of this effort will, I think, also sort of naturally help people improve their quality if we're able to help them attract and retain staff that have the kind of degrees and, you know, skills that would allow them to maximize points within the quality rating improvement system criteria.
Rebecca, I see you've got your hand raised.
Yeah, I might be asking a question at the wrong time. I apologize. I'm wondering if any of these options will help childcare providers fill a gap for childcare for families that work in the non-traditional kind of 8 to 4 time frame. One thing that we heard from some parents, especially those that are caregivers themselves, is that they've really been struggling to find childcare. So a lot more places are losing those kind of second shift workforce. Thank you.
I think that's another thing we've talked about, prioritizing, and I think that would be, again, these are good questions to ask, and if these are things that people are hearing and think are important, and this is why we're having this conversation, because certainly we're very aware that those non-traditional hours care, if you will, is extremely challenging for families, and there are examples of childcare programs that do offer that care and do it successfully, and so I do think that elevating those, providers who are doing it, how they're doing it, is one, important so other providers can learn about how they can offer that in their communities, but two, prioritizing that would also be very important. And certainly, I think these public-private partnerships would be a good mechanism for doing this, because these are the businesses whose workers are working during those hours, and perhaps they're having difficulty filling those roles.
Yeah, Rebecca, awesome question. And really, these questions are helping us sort of crystallize the differences between these two programs, because my sense is that, yeah, that's a perfect fit for public-private partnership. And also, I'm curious whether or not it's a fit for workforce grants, because it's that sort of innovation idea in a community. And I think that's really how I'm distinguishing the difference between, the first bucket, public-private partnership funding program, really about taking, trusted relationships in the community and kind of building or deepening them, whereas the workforce would be like, yeah, we don't have any care past 4 p.m. in our community, and our economic development entity in our community and a couple of business leaders come and sit at the table and talk about it. And the workforce grant might be an accelerator for helping, get an idea like that off the ground in a community.
Yeah, I think that's totally right, Emily. As far as, new offerings, enhancements, that would be really appropriate for the workforce grants. And I see Dan has his hand raised.
Yeah, that brings up two ideas that, or questions maybe that I had regarding sort of the workforce grants. Is it possible to prioritize specific industries or kind of associated with that? At DSPS, we've been looking at equity in our licensed workforce, and particularly when I think of licensed trades, gender equity is always very, very low. And one of the primary reasons for that is childcare and the ability for particularly women to get childcare when they have jobs that, again, might not be 9 to 5 or might involve travel to locations outside of their immediate living area. And so I'm wondering if there's been thought around both how to address the equity piece, and then also maybe with a specific emphasis on industries that feel more impacts.
Dan, that's a super great just observation, I would say. And, I'll be real honest, like, I don't think that has been on our radar to be thinking about those industries that have that disproportionate gender inequality. I think it would be interesting to follow up and talk a little bit more with you guys over at DSPS on, what you're seeing around and what you're hearing around that sort of gender disparity, because that is an interesting way to think about equity. I think Kathy brought up the childcare deserts, and that's definitely, kind of in our bailiwick as a natural lens that we would use to sort of make equity decisions. We've also talked a lot, and some of our data work at the department has been around identifying particular communities where kind of the general overall health, wellness, and sort of 0 to 5 space is disproportionately underserved. And so using data from across lots of different agencies, and again, another plug for the survey that helps us surface the data that's at our fingertip across agencies to be able to make those kinds of decisions and determinations. I think we are, because of the amount of federal funding we have, we are really interested in pushing, pushing further into this idea of how to lift up underserved communities or underserved industries as part of some of the decision making that we can do relative to this federal funding. So I love where your head is at, Dan.
Thanks, and not to put anyone on the spot, but I know DWD, as you can imagine, is very involved in that as well.
Great, thanks, Dan.
Yeah, thank you for that. Those really interesting points. And I will say, when we get to the toolkit part, one of the things we do talk about in our toolkit, or we hope to talk about in our toolkit, is around women in the workforce and how childcare is really important for both from an equity perspective, but also for women in the workforce and retaining and attracting working moms. So then a component for both of these opportunities is technical assistance, which we are. So one of the things that we've heard is a barrier sometimes to businesses who are and childcare providers who are interested in pursuing public-private partnerships and businesses who are interested in supporting childcare in their communities is it's a complicated business to start. There's a lot of rules, which makes sense, and regulations, and it can be challenging if this is not your area of expertise. And so we are looking to provide childcare navigators to provide technical assistance, more targeted towards the business side of the public-private partnerships to help them maneuver this childcare system. And ideally, we'd like these to be regional positions so that businesses would have really more intensive technical assistance rather than just being one person to cover the whole state. And this is another area which we'll talk about momentarily that we are interested in seeing if there are other agencies and programs might be interested in supporting these childcare navigator positions.
And this, just a reminder on this, those of you who attended our last meeting, we heard from Mark Novotny from up near Ashland, talking about the Evergrow program. And when we asked her sort of like, okay, what would be the single biggest help? She really identified, if there was a person whose job it was to help navigate all of the different regulations, the rules, the bureaucratic hoops, and help to clear those hurdles, help to work across agencies. So, the relationship between some of the local building codes and ordinances that is definitely under the DSPS domain, versus sort of all things childcare regulation environment, which is absolutely the DCF domain. It's a complicated proposition, and it's definitely a high hurdle that we've heard from a lot of business leaders in my conversations across the state. It's the thing that kind of causes them to say, I just don't know if I want to climb this hill. So that's really where we're trying to lean in around these navigator positions. Thanks, Caitlin.
Thank you. And so then lastly, the other piece that we've heard, there's been a lot of interest in statewide, the array of audiences, is the concept of a business childcare partnership toolkit. And so this would support these grants, but also be a standalone resource for businesses and childcare partners who are interested in pursuing business childcare partnerships. And it'll provide, we envision this as a comprehensive document, and we have a draft table of contents, which I will share with you right here. And is, in this document you received, we know there's going to be some changes and shifts to this table of contents, but this is really focusing on providing businesses with why should businesses partner with childcare, and having data, graphics, testimonials of successful examples of these sorts of partnerships throughout the document, so they can see themselves, see their peers who have done this successfully. So providing some context, so like we were talking about around equity, preventing brain drain, having supporting women in the workforce, some of those things that we talked about being important during this conversation, being here, helping them see what their role in supporting childcare might be. So how they can offer not only funding, but facilities, business knowledge, marketing capabilities to childcare providers to help make their childcare businesses more successful. And then we really sort of envision this as a choose your own adventure in a way. There's not only one door that businesses can walk through in supporting childcare, and really encouraging them to help identify what families need in their communities and what partners there are in their communities, because we know there are lots of childcare providers and programs doing great work. So providing some context about the early care and education sector within Wisconsin, and then providing some models that they might be interested in pursuing. So whether that's childcare startup, on-site childcare at their business locations, employer purchase of childcare slots, or supporting employee access to childcare subsidies, is something that, we sort of use this again as a choose your own adventure, what works best for the families in your community, your employees, and your childcare partners. And then helping them go through this list of what the rules and regulations and considerations are for opening childcare, so that they're aware. And this is, again, where we would see the childcare navigators fitting in as well, to be able to provide support around this section C as it is right now, for how to open childcare. And this is something we're going to move up into an earlier section after some discussions, but why high quality childcare is also important and what that means. So what does high quality childcare look like? Why is that important? Why is this something our community needs and deserves? And some of the ways that we measure quality in Wisconsin. So talking about Youngstar and some of those other pieces. And then we know this is an ongoing partnership that has to happen. So what sustainability considerations that we should contemplate as we're building these public-private partnerships. So how to develop a sustainability plan, and then also providing businesses with resources. WICA has a number of great business class and shared service sort of trainings and opportunities. And then also PowerPoints and handouts for them to be able to do some outreach to the childcare communities and to get other partners. So making it easy and accessible for them to start have these conversations in their communities. So that was a lot of information in a quick overview, but I'm wondering if anyone has any questions, thoughts about the toolkit.
I just want to give a shout out before we would field any questions. Just a shout out to WEDC and DWD for really leaning in on this particular idea, working with Wisconsin Early Childhood Association, and helping us to very clearly. I mean, I don't think we would have been able to share kind of that roadmap or that outline without the help of those two agencies and then our external partners. So really appreciate the kind of shoulder to shoulder work on this particular project.
And we met with WICA and WEDC at the end of last week, and we're on board for this to be a collaborative document. So that's very exciting. And we're hoping to release, because as you saw, it was a rather long table of contents, and we know there's immediate need for some of this information and supports. So we are working on releasing the toolkit in chapters and sections, if you will, beginning this fall, so that there would be some of this information available to those who are interested in applying for the public-private partnership and workforce grants, and then having all the sections out by spring of 2022.
Thank you. Any
Yeah,
questions, comments? Yeah, sorry.
I just have a question. This is Betsy from WEDC, and I love that you just said that, Emily, because as this is being presented, I'm taking copious notes to, bring back to my team. And, working with businesses across the state, we are hearing this need over and over again. And so I love this idea. I think this is something that's really practical that we can push out to a lot of businesses. One suggestion I have, I love that you guys are working on this as quickly as possible, and obviously things take time, but maybe it would be possible just to get a one-pager just released, within the next few months that we could start pushing out to businesses before, so they don't have to wait for the chapters to come available. So that would just be one suggestion I had.
Thanks, Betsy. That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, I think we definitely feel the urgency around this, and I'm glad that Caitlin mentioned, that obviously we want people to feel empowered. We want to grow the circle of people who compete and are awarded these two, workforce-related grant opportunities that we have, and we definitely feel like some of the information in this toolkit is going to help unlock that for businesses. We just feel, to be really honest, we feel like there are so many people around the state within the business community who are flirting with this idea right now. And so we need, and I think WEDC has been such a great partner in helping us understand what are those key pieces of information that people need to kind of tip them into the yes column. And to make them feel confident taking that first sort of scary step and know that they're going to be supported. So I think as we think about how to sort of tier out what's most urgent and what's most important from that timeline or from that outline, we'll continue to sort of lean on your expertise to say, yeah, maybe more this and less this, and like tomorrow if you can, kind of thing. Thanks, Betsy.
Great. So I'll just pause. So we're going to move now to the ideas for how you can contribute. And this is by no means an exhaustive list. We welcome your input about how you think your agency, your program, or you might know other partners who would contribute to this effort. But certainly we are providing the funding for these programs, but as you mentioned, there are some gaps and some needs around marketing, outreach, and some other pieces that we'd be interested in hearing from you about how you think, again, and some of the things you might already be doing might complement this effort. So a couple of the things that really are top of mind for us, and we discussed this, we're going over the grants, are capital expenditures. So we know for sure that facilities and also just improving existing facilities are a huge need for the childcare community. And unfortunately, this federal funding cannot be utilized to support this. So that is something that we are interested in learning about, perhaps that your agency or program, or of funding or other mechanisms that would allow support for these sort of categories of need. And then also for the childcare navigators. As we mentioned before, we envision them as regional positions. And one idea that's been floated is sitting in regional workforce boards. We think that might be a good fit. And we're seeking diverse funding for these positions because, as you all know, working in state government, it's always better when we have some diversity of funding to support these positions, as we really want them to live beyond these funding opportunities. We would love for these to be ongoing positions. And so the funding piece is something that we are looking to see if perhaps any of you are aware of opportunities that might supplement some of these efforts.
And Caitlin, just to add on the capital expenditure side, I think it's also just the knowledge that we want each of you to have to be explicit about funding opportunities that may be, pre-existing funding opportunities, or planned funding or planned grant opportunities that are coming out. Just thinking about how to talk about them and market them to potential childcare industry, knowing that there is this hole around capital expenditures. So if you do have a planned grant program, and again, I'll call back to last week's awesome announcement with DWD and WEDC. They were so explicit. Missy Hughes was very explicit in her remarks around childcare industry being a really great industry to support through these funds. That kind of sort of promotion of a larger, broader pot of funding, if there is this sort of capital expenditure allowance, is a really helpful sort of nuance here. Rebecca, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. But mine is really on the second one, on the childcare navigators. Is that okay? Okay. Can that also be expanded to other family support? Because we're working with another part of DCF on a family navigator within 53206. Again, we hear the need from our listening sessions around childcare, but one of the biggest quotes that was, across all the different parents that we heard from was, getting to some basic needs and stable housing prevents us from being present in our children's life. So it's childcare and there's a full list. And one thing that we're working with the family resource centers, but then again, specifically within the 53206 initiative, is that family navigator. Is this really focused only on childcare?
Yeah, I mean, I'm really very interested in the family navigator concept, but I really see these specific positions as being very more of a sort of navigator of business rules, regulations, kind of that roadblock clearer. So one of the questions when my team was pitching me on this concept, one of the questions that I asked was, do we think the ideal candidate for a person like this, or a childcare navigator, would be somebody who was deep in the weeds on childcare, or somebody who was sort of like kind of an industry person who was skilled at navigating across multiple agencies? And I think it's much more the latter than the former. I think this is about, so I think about the CFO from gosh, I'm blanking on like my favorite organization. Somebody help me out. The place where our first leadership council on early years meeting was, that do basically like birth to aging supports, South Side of Milwaukee.
UCC
Oh
and Laura Gutierrez.
Oh, I hate it when that happens. I feel so like old. UCC, yeah, when I think about the CFO from United Community Center, basically like this person has been for 35 years, like their secret sauce in being able to sort of scout and navigate all of the opportunities, all of the programming across so many state agencies, so that UCC can unlock and braid together funding, programming, new opportunities, and also requirements of all of these different funding streams to be able to make best use. That's the type of thing that I think we're seeing in this bucket, sort of different than family navigators, where I would say this person really needs to sort of live, eat, breathe family supports.
Yeah, and I think that's a good clarification. And I also do think that, though, it would be really interesting for whomever's in that position and these family navigators to have some collaboration, to be able for them to express to businesses, what the needs are around childcare and other supports in their community. I think that would be a really interesting sort of coordination point, certainly. And it looks like Tatiana has her hand raised as well.
Hi, good morning. I am sitting in for Secretary Joel Brennan at the DOA, and so I'm very new to this process. But I think one of the questions that I think I have had before too was regarding funding. And so one of the things that I wanted to sort of connect the dots to see if it makes sense for for this program as well. So there was a recent announcement $130 million investment in workforce solutions that the governor had announced, I believe it was last week or the week prior. And so I know one of the pieces of it is sort of, WEDC, the DWD, and the DOA are all kind of combining forces to administer these 10 million regional grants. And so one of the pieces is, specifically, to meet local workforce needs, such as childcare. I don't think that those, like from my understanding, it seems like that's also looking at sort of existing infrastructure. So there may not be an opportunity for kind of the capital expenditure piece that obviously is missing. But I'm kind of wondering if, if there's opportunity to sort of tie this together somehow, kind of if, what would need to happen to sort of utilize that funding as well for this piece.
Well, it sounds like there's an opportunity to have some conversations, certainly. I don't know if the secretary, it sounds like you had something to add.
Yeah, I mean, oops. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Short answer is we're actively promoting this funding through our channels to childcare industry, existing childcare industry, because we absolutely, we're super excited about this pot of funding and the program that everybody's running. I think like your question around like, ooh, could there be something more planful or more proactive around some of these sort of dedicated pieces? That would be interesting to explore. But I think, the easy answer is, yeah, like we're working hard to make sure that our existing, sort of listserv, everybody who's sort of tapped into childcare through DCF channels has the knowledge of this opportunity on the table.
Thank you. I'm wondering if anybody has any other thoughts around the funding piece, or like Emily mentioned, I think part of it is you all have a lot of expertise around things like loans, perhaps like low or no interest loans that exist. It doesn't necessarily have to be new sources of funding or programs that exist. Like, Tatiana mentioned opportunity around perhaps collaborating around another initiative that's happening. So I think there's some of those pieces too that are really helpful, and not just, dedication of new funding, but just helping us be aware of the universe of what is available.
Correct. And I would just say partners on this call have been really fabulous at being able to reach out early if any of these things sort of pop up in your universe. So I would sort of leave it there and say, we wanted to kind of make transparent some of the holes and some of the places that we've heard a lot of interest, and just again encourage you to reach out if you think you've got an idea, if you think you've got something that may sort of fit in one of these buckets where maybe there are a little less meat on the bones.
Yes, thank you. So please, again, feel free to reach out if you have any ideas. We would welcome that. And then the other two ways that we thought, and again, this isn't an exclusive list, that we thought perhaps Lacey members could be involved in, is around marketing and outreach. So certainly all of you through your agencies and programs have stakeholders that exist outside of our typical reach at DCF, if you will. And so making sure that, as Emily mentioned, we really want lots of applications for these opportunities because we know there's such a critical need for this sort of partnership. So, community developers, other business leaders, K-12s, because they're also a huge employer, especially if we talk about rural communities. The K-12 school system is often one of the larger employers in a community, technical and higher education institutions, really having them serve as either partners or applicants in this opportunity. So if there's any sectors that you think we may not have thought of that we should engage in outreach to, that is something we're definitely interested in. I really liked, I believe it was David's point about businesses that perhaps we could prioritize in sectors. So having that kind of conversation is something that we'll definitely engage in. And then the last opportunity would be around program design and implementation. So as we mentioned, some of these questions are really important for us to consider as we're developing our criteria, and has already prompted some thinking, but setting grant criteria, refining the program design, reviewing applications, and then also supporting the development and rollout of our toolkit are a couple other ideas that we had for ways that perhaps people would be interested as subject matter experts or as reviewers. I'm going to pause and see if anyone has any thoughts about these two opportunities.
And I would just say, sorry, I'm terrible at pausing today. I would say that we are going to be proactively reaching out on some of the ideas Caitlin just shared. You know, already today we had some questions and some comments that you know, that are going to help us refine and define grant criteria. I think this piece around reviewing applications, I think, is critically important. What we've seen is obviously, you know, each of us have our dedicated kind of usual suspects group, right? When it comes to kind of who our defined stakeholders are. And I think when we're trying to push into innovative territory, it really behooves us to try to grow the folks who can kind of look at applications with new eyes, particularly as we're trying to reach into those more innovative places. You know, the sort of muscle memory is strong to kind of want to go back to sort of what we know, what we feel comfortable with. And I think a couple of the programs that we talked about today are really about pushing beyond into places that are new frontier for us. So I think the reviewing applications piece is something that you could probably expect to hear from us if you've got particular expertise in this sort of small W, big W workforce conversation, because I think you could be helpful to us through the fall and the spring, or folks in your agency could be helpful to us in providing that external review. Any other thoughts on this? I'm keeping an eye on time, and I think we are nearly there. Any last thoughts on marketing outreach, program design and implementation, or anything else? Okay. Caitlin and Andrea, I am very appreciative of both of you stepping in. We've got Andrea at the lake house. Caitlin is a new mom to an adorable little one who is just a couple of months old, and neither of them were expecting to present this morning. You both did a wonderful job walking through these documents. Really appreciate that. Folks who joined us today, really appreciate your engagement and your willingness to collaborate, and your willingness to help us sort of work through some of these ideas that we've all been generating together. And also just want to thank you for all the ways that you support early care and education in the work that you do, and that you make it visible. I think that Wisconsin is truly becoming a state that is looked to, where the leaders in the state know and understand what is happening in the 0 to 5 space, understand how it supports communities, understand how it provides infrastructure for communities. And that's really the goal of LEC. That's really what we're trying to do here. So appreciate you as always. Our next meeting is scheduled for the end of September, so Thursday, September 30th. And excited to continue to do this work with you. If you have one of those great ideas in the middle of the night and you want to reach out, I know none of you are shy. You will reach out to me or to Nadia or to any of our great DCF staff, and we will be equally not shy in reaching out to you with ideas we might have for ways that we can collaborate with you and your organization. Nadia, I saw you jumped on. Do you need to say anything else here, or are you?
No, we are good. And I'm sorry that I was off camera, but I have a 6-year-old who doesn't want to clean up toys and is hiding by my feet. So.
No problem. I just couldn't tell if you were flagging me there for something. Okay, great. Well, with that, again, we have to say, go Bucks, Bucks and 6. Have a great night watching the Bucks, and we'll talk to you all soon. Thanks, everybody, and take care.
Thank you.